And a sign of what happens when you have so many events, you actually have to start thinking about how the events connect to the events. Marvel has announced a new title, and it's a one-shot, to be fair. And they've done tons of one-shots in the past. But I think there's something interesting about kind of the future and what this may mean for comics. Specifically, we're talking about tying together Empyre and King in Black with a new title called Web of Venom. So let's talk about that. Hey everybody, this is Perch. We got an announcement from Marvel. This is a small announcement, and I want to stress here, this has happened before. This isn't like it's a brand new thing. So before people rush off too quickly, but with the torches or the confetti for Marvel, depending on which side you happen to fall in, we've seen these kind of tie-ins before and these kind of leading up to the issues. But the interesting one here, and why this is a little bit different, is that specifically Marvel is highlighting this as Empyre ends, King in Black begins, and this is a kind of one-shot connecting Empyre to King in Black. So to kind of level set for a second, Empyre is the event that's going on right now. It features the Avengers and the Fantastic Four and the Kree and the Skrull and the Plant People, the Quadi, and they're having a big fight. Things will never be the same after this event is done. It's supposed to herald in a new space age for the Marvel Universe. And then in December, we've got something called King of Black, and this is the spiritual successor or the follow-up to Absolute Carnage, where Null, who's, let's just call him the King of the Symbiotes for a moment. That's not completely right, but that's okay. He is coming to Earth, and it's a dark god. He's going to be a big thing that's going to go on. It's going to tie in all the storylines that are going on with Venom and Spider-Man and the Avengers. Jason Aaron's going to be involved in all that. So these two things all kind of come together. So this is a one-shot that basically is going to say, we've got one event and then we've got another event, and we're going to have to connect these dots because maybe and part of it's the virus delayed Empyre, so these things are squeezing together maybe a little bit more than people intended, although King in Black was supposed to be out earlier than December, so who knows. Anyway, this title is coming out in October. As I mentioned, it's a one-shot. It's being written by Clay McLeod Chapman with art from Gio Villanova. There we go. Cover by Philip Tan. And this, so why is this unique? Well, a couple things. First of all, this isn't being written by Donny Cates or Al Ewing or Dan Slott, and those are the writers for King in Black and Empyre, respectively. It's being written by a different person, and it's really this book is really intended to kind of handle one event and set up the next. So we don't know exactly how Empyre ends, although we have some guesses that maybe the Avengers and the Fantastic Four have to create for themselves a greater role in space because of their participation in the battle in Empyre. I got some feedback that I spoiled an issue for someone. I didn't think I guess I did. So I apologize, by the way, if you heard an earlier video about Empyre. I thought enough time had passed that I wasn't spoiling anything, but I do apologize if I did spoil it. But there's some events that occur in the first Empyre issue that seem to suggest that maybe there's some guilt or some feelings of responsibility for the Avengers and how they have to kind of handle things going forward. So in theory, and this is pure speculation, they're going off into space. Now, meanwhile, the big threat from space is coming to Earth, and this is Null, who was freed in Absolute Carnage, and he was appeared in Silver Surfer Black, and he proved himself to be a pretty crazy threat that was destructive to the Silver Surfer, who's a cosmic level hero. So the idea is that he's really going to wreck things up. Donny Cates, in kind of pushing his event, says this is the coolest, darkest, most heavy metal Klatathu dark horror thing I've ever been able to do, because everything is heavy metal and extreme. It's actually interesting. In the 90s, it was extreme, but we're not saying extreme anymore. We say heavy metal. Heavy metal is what we mean. Is it heavy metal? Which all goes to my speculation that we're headed for the... never mind. I don't need to get into that again. Anyway, why this is particular, what is a big deal for a one shot? Well, first off, it's interesting that Marvel's now seeing a need to basically connect one event to another event. Basically, the event, and we're not even, this doesn't even reflect things like Ten of Swords, which is coming out in between these two things. So we've talked about too many events. Your mileage may vary, but it signals that Marvel is placing even greater prominence on their events. That their events are kind of the cornerstones of the comics, or the sun, and everything just kind of orbits around it. What's interesting is that these kinds of connective stories were previously handled in the main titles, things like the Avengers or Venom and Ghost Rider, Doctor Strange, etc. But now we're creating spin-off stories specifically designed to connect the dots. I have a bigger question, and I don't want this to sound too cynical or too negative, but what goes on at Marvel with their core books? Things like Spider-Man, things like Avengers, things like Fantastic Four. It feels like those are all becoming very slowly placeholders for events. The events is where things happen, and the comics are just kind of, keeping chairs warm until we get to the event, and the big moments are happening to events, and then the regular titles can be kind of some of the aftermath or the reaction to the events. But now we've got two events very closely together, and we've got a connective story from one event to the other event that is a separate title too. It's interesting. It kind of, your head spins a little bit. Marvel is committing definitely to the strategy of events drives their company and drives their universe. And I think it's setting a tone. I don't know if Marvel intends this or not, but as you talk to other retailers, you talk to fans in comic shops, more and more you're hearing that, this kind of feeling like the regular titles are becoming less and less important. And, more and more, you actually see it, you can see it for yourself in comic shops. Pull box customers are being advertised like, do you want to subscribe to this event? Do you want to subscribe to this kind of crossover, as opposed to, do you want to subscribe to this title? Now, some may quickly point out, so not all this is new. Definitely, comic shops have said, do you want to just buy all the Civil War titles? Do you want to buy, etc.? But now with so many events, comic shops have to put the emphasis on more on the events than the regular titles. And I think this sets up an interesting problem where if an event doesn't take, like Axis, for example, just didn't take like some of the other events Marvel had done. And if that is the case, and you've shifted kind of your publishing and your financial strategy around events, it's going to be a little bit harder to recover. War of the Realms was another one that didn't have the impact that I think Marvel expected it did. But things like Absolute Carnage did very well. So it's an interesting strategy. I'm not going to say it's, destined for failure or good. The jury's out. But it is an interesting shift. And granted, some may say, hey, you're making a big deal out of one title. Yeah, maybe so. But it is interesting to see Marvel now publishing one-shots that connect one event to another event. I don't know. What do you think? Am I making too big a deal out of this? Quite possible. But definitely I'm finding even people that are hyped and pumped for King in Black and Null to be a little wary of kind of what all this means. I'm hearing more and more questions about, how many crossover issues are we getting in King of Black? Is it going to be a lot? And definitely, I'm besides just me, I'm hearing more and more questions about what does this mean for the regular titles? Do they matter as much anymore? And I think it's a good question. So what do you think? Do they matter as much anymore? Do you think this is a good strategy? And where do you think this all winds up? Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, follow me on all the various social media platforms that we all know and love or don't. And but most importantly, thanks for listening.